Thank you, Doctor. You know you left your cell phone here, Doctor? Doctor's not really feeling well. He's fighting a bit of flu, and Ed Miller, the wonderful man who puts all this together, is also not well. I don't know, maybe you had a chance already to thank Ed, but Ed's this guy who quietly pulls everything together and brings everyone here to this position. Just, I don't know where he is, but let's hear it for Ed Miller, okay? It's great to be back with you, and as I walked from the parking lot, I passed where they're selling books, and I saw a bunch of my own books there with a picture on the front cover I didn't recognize. But it must have been nice once to have black hair, but that's not there anymore. It's nice and gray, earned through the real life that you just heard about, the wonderful real life of parish ministry and the experience of media as well. It's a great opportunity to work in media as well as in parish life, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that in just a bit, but just to bring you up to date, I continue to host a show called Personally Speaking, which airs first on Sirius Satellite Radio, and then even more easily for people is on iTunes.com through your computer. But two of the more recent interviews I thought were particularly interesting. I'm old enough to remember back in the 80s when President Reagan nominated Robert Bork to be the member of the Supreme Court. And you remember he was terribly vilified and destroyed by the Senate, and in fact he was calumnized in so many ways, especially by Senator Ted Kennedy. But he suffered terribly, and he was ultimately, by a relatively close vote, he was defeated. Always we knew he had a great intellect, and that intellect always came down on the side of the unborn. And I think that's the reason he was defeated for the Senate, because he was viewed to be the vote that would finally reverse Roe versus Wade. But what I was intrigued about and why I interviewed him recently was because he's decided that it's not enough to be on the side of the angels in terms of intellect alone or science alone, but that it's also important to be a person of faith. And so he has become, he had been raised generic Protestant, and he has become Roman Catholic, and it's just a wonderful thing to see. Another interesting guest recently, at 92 years old, was the 1955 winner of the Academy Award for Best Actor, Ernest Borgnine. And great guy, but what I found particularly interesting, I said, are there spiritual transformational moments for you? And he said, you know, I made the film with Zeffirelli called Jesus of Nazareth. He said, and I was lukewarm in my faith. He said, but there's a scene where as the centurion I have to stand at the foot of the cross and look to the cross. He said, and as I looked to the cross, I found myself crying, and Zeffirelli came down and said, but I haven't asked you in this scene to cry. And he said, I know, this is not something that's part of my acting. I'm finally getting it. What he did for me, what he does for us, is so overwhelming, I can't help but cry. Isn't that the truth? Aren't we blessed to have a God who died for us? So that's radio. Please tune in when you can. It's called Personally Speaking. Then there's a TV show called Close Encounter. And Close Encounter has already started to air on PBS, and it will air on CBS. And it's just giving people we think we know a chance to talk about their faith. I mentioned to you before we had done a show. The first show that aired was the show with Derek Jeter. Most people know him as the Yankee superstar, but they don't know that he's a practicing Catholic, don't know that he goes to Mass every week. And along with Jorge Posada is one of the two most faithful members of the team who are Roman Catholic. He was wonderful. And an interesting thing, too, if you're a married person who thinks you haven't got a lot going for you. I remember asking Jeter at one point, you seem to have it all. You have money, you have influence, you have popularity, you have everything the world says is important. Do you feel like you have it all? And he said, no. He said, what I really, really want and what I don't have, the two most important things in life. He said, I'm 34 and I have no prospects for marriage. He said, and I'm also a guy with no children. And if you don't have someone to share your life with, someone to be married to, if you don't have children, he said, you really don't have much of anything, do you? Isn't that interesting that this guy who we would say has it all realizes that the things that last in the end are family, that the things that last are faith, that the things that matter are about touching the future by the children that we're blessed to bring into the world. You're blessed. I have none, okay? Anyone who says, I'm daddy, I deny it, I deny it, I deny it. The other guest we had on the show was Anne Rice, and what a great story. Anne Rice, the wonderful novelist of all those ridiculous vampire novels, who's made a promise, no more vampire novels. She will only write now about Jesus Christ. And what a beautiful gift that is, to turn her gift of writing over to the Lord. She was 38 years, she said, a card-carrying member of the atheist family, and then realized a few years ago that she needed to come home to the faith of her childhood, that she needed to become a practicing Roman Catholic. Only there would she find the true meaning of life. Isn't that great? We have shows to air coming up. One is with Kirk Cameron. Kirk Cameron, the wonderful actor from Growing Pains, who did admit to me afterwards he was a little nervous as an evangelical Christian that he was going to be interviewed by a Catholic priest, but he said by the end of the interview he was happy to see I didn't have horns. And so it's nice to see the common ground we have. And interestingly enough, from this evangelical Christian, I get into the politics thing, which I do sometimes, and I said, are there any issues that disqualify someone in your mind? He said, yeah. How can you sit idly by and say that someone is really good, except, they believe in terminating children? He said, you can't separate them out. You can't say someone is a good politician while they stand with the culture of death. And this from an evangelical Protestant, Another fellow that was on recently, you might know, is Jonathan Jackson. Now, he won the Emmy Award 3 times for playing Lucky on General Hospital, a show I must admit to you I've never watched. But anyway, what was interesting is he's a non-denominational Christian. And we're talking at one point, and this is what he says. He says, you and I have always agreed to disagree. He said, you're with a formal religion. I'm non-denominational. I really haven't had the highest regard for Catholics, but we get along. I like you personally, so that's where it stands. But Jim, let me tell you what happened recently. I said, what happened? He said, I went to Barnes & Noble one day, and I always go through the religious section, the spirituality section, and I picked up a book, and it was beautiful. It was all about Jesus of Nazareth, and I'm sitting there in the store, and I'm reading it cover to cover. Everything in it I love. Everything in it I agree with. I thought this was such a magnificent exposition of this Jesus whom I love. Oh, God. But then, Jim, I closed the book cover, and who do you think wrote it? But some guy, Benedict XVI. He said, Monsignor Jim, do you think maybe I'm a closet Catholic and I don't know it, I said, well, Jonathan, we welcome you. And then the third guest that day when we taped was the wonderful Catherine Hicks. Catherine Hicks, you may know from Seventh Heaven. She was the mom and wonderful, wonderful lady, Catholic lady, graduate of Notre Dame University. But something she said that was striking to me, she said, in Hollywood, you know that if you're on the wrong side politically, you may never work again. She said, but after 10 or 11 years of a hit series, she said, I'm very thankful that I finally have the courage to say I am a Catholic pro-life feminist, and I apologize to no one. I will stand with the unborn. These are all wonderful things. Television is a great way to reach people. I love that I have a parish, Our Lady of Lourdes. I love my parish, St. Thomas the Apostle, before that. But I'm aware that I reach several hundred people on a Sunday, whereas TV and radio give us a chance to touch the hearts of many people who are not like you. They're not committed to their faith, but they are so often on the fence and need to hear that they're not alone, that there are people out there who believe and who want to embrace the Catholic faith. I know everybody can't, but if there's somebody out there who's been particularly blessed, come see me I wouldn't be a priest if I didn't have a donation envelope. Because TV is certainly an expensive ministry, and I want to keep it going, but I certainly need the help of those who are especially blessed. So I'm not talking about the average guy or gal who's paying their bills, as hard as it is to do, and I know what those bills are. I made a commitment a long time ago that when I had my nieces and nephews, when they're born, you get so thrilled with the fact that these nieces and nephews are here. I said to my sisters, any one of you have children, all the children you have, I'll pay for their Catholic education. What was I thinking? Now, every time I have to raise the tuition in my parish, I grimace, because I know what it costs, and I'm paying it still. I have one more in high school, and then I'll be free by the time they get to college. But what a wonderful, wonderful thing that is to have the experience of dealing with people on a regular basis, normal people like family, to remind me what matters. Okay. Before I get into the heart of my topic, let me suggest something, especially for those of you who are deeply committed to your faith, that I'm going to ask you to do when you leave here today. I find conferences like this, and I'm giving another one tomorrow on the other side of the country, but I find great things happen in conferences like this. We get filled with the Spirit. We hear the truth about the church. We come to love Jesus and His divine mercy. We love Faustina. We love the whole experience. We have a great Mass. We pray together. We sing together. It's all good. And then we go back to our regular lives. And we somehow or another separate out or compartmentalize our lives so that we've got this great spiritual thing going on this weekend, and then Monday comes and we're back to being sometimes the same miserable people that we're inclined to be. I'm going to ask you not to let that happen. I'm going to ask you to take seriously the things we talk about today, all of us, me too, and try to transform it. Some of you know this about me because you've heard me tell these stories, but they're true. I have a routine with my nieces and nephews. They come to my Mass on Sunday, and then they get in my car, and I say to them, all right, what are the 3 points I made in the homily? And if they get the points right, then they get breakfast after Mass. So they're really getting good at it. But anyway, this has been going on for years. Well, not too long ago, I gave a homily, and it was all about custody of the tongue. I talked about the fact that God gave you and me the gift of speech. And He intends for us to use it to build up, not to tear down. So there is no room in the Christian tongue for cursing, lying, swearing, gossip, half-truths, prejudice, bias, negativity, pick on the people you love. No room for that. That our job is to use the gift of speech as God intended. Anything else is less than His purpose and is therefore wrong. Anyway, I thought, a decent homily. I get in the car with my nieces and nephews, and I have a problem, as my friends know, with the roads. I've never met a road that didn't set me on edge. And I've said to you before, I'm half Italian, half Irish, right? And the Italian comes bubbling to the top. And in the New York area, there's always too much traffic, and there's always drivers who make you crazy. And this one particular morning with my nephews and nieces in the car, sure enough, don't you know, somebody cuts me off, and out comes the mouth, every 4-letter word. You know what I did. You've done it yourself. Anyway, I said things I shouldn't have said, and it came out of my mouth in front of these kids, and then there's a tap on my shoulder. And it's my 14-year-old Anthony. And he says, Uncle Jim? I said, what? Can I ask you a question? What? Do you even listen to your homilies? What Anthony was calling me on is something we all need to be called on, which is the tendency to do the religious thing in the religious setting at beautiful places like this, but then to move back to our old selves, and sometimes that becomes a problem. That's one point. I want to say take it with you and live what we're talking about today. Second thing I want to suggest to you is, so many times people say to me, I don't seem to be able to pass the faith on to my kids or my grandchildren. That's a common problem. You're not alone. But I believe that one of the ways we can do it best is by the quality of our joy. And I can't say this enough. I have a huge problem with the fact that so many of us Catholic Christians are among the dourest, sourest people in the world. And I don't know where we lost the sense of joy. In the early church, the Shepherd of Hermas listed what were the most serious sins. And right at the top was something called tristitia, which means dejection, despair, or a lack of hope. Now, I'm not talking about chronic illness, where someone genuinely has a problem with depression that might even be physical. I'm talking about the fact that we seem so often to think that serious spirituality is best made manifest by glumness. And I'm here to tell you that if you've been saved, if you believe in divine mercy, if you believe that Jesus' love for you is unconditional, how could you not be a person of joy? How could you not be happy? I'll tell you where I see it, and I know this is a sensitive issue because we've all been raised a particular way, but as a priest who has given out, 100,000, 200,000 opportunities to give the Eucharist out, you see it in the way we've been trained to receive. From an early time, think back to second grade. That's where most of us were first receiving communion. And we were taught, especially if you're my age or older, that you better look intensely serious. And that translates into, for little kids, you better look scared. We come up to communion. I wish we could have a video camera on all the faces of people coming to Mass. Most people come up like they've lost their best friend. And I'm saying to myself, I'm giving out today. I get to be an instrument to dispense to the people of God the body and blood, not a symbol, the body and blood, a symbol, and much more, the actual, real presence of Jesus Christ. What a magnificent thing that is. What a great gift that is. And yet I'm presenting it to people who don't look like they're happy about what they're receiving. And I don't think it's that they're not happy. I think that we've convinced ourselves that a lack of joy denotes seriousness of purpose. But I'm here to say to you, look, you know what it's like when you run into somebody you love, especially somebody you may not have seen for a while? Well, you just know, immediately you get a smile on your face. I love when you meet Mother Teresa. When you met Mother Teresa always had this wrinkled face, but you couldn't miss the inevitable smile. She greeted you always with a smile, and she would say, peace begins with a smile. It causes the defense to be lowered. It allows us to see that the other person is our friend and to let them in. And I'm suggesting to you that if we want to communicate to our children and our grandchildren the greatness of the faith, it can begin with joy. It begins with joy. And that means re-examining some of what we think spirituality is. It means taking a look at whether or not being glum is in fact a spiritual value, or looking glum. Some of you know I like to tell the story that when I go on vacation, I usually go upstate New York, and I go to Mass, and I attend Mass in street clothes just like you. Why? I sit there because I want to see what you go through every Sunday. And there's this one little village upstate New York, which I'll never name. It's had the same single priest as the pastor probably for 20 years. And I sit there on these very uncomfortable benches that you sit on, and I kneel on these kneelers that you kneel on, and I listen to this guy who is completely preaching, first of all, among the most boring preachers I ever heard. Okay, you can't help it if you're boring. But there's no joy in the guy. This is the living Word of God. Doesn't sound like it's living, Father. Sounds like it died a while ago, you know? I mean, if it's the Word of God, if Jesus is present in His Word, if Jesus is present in His people, if Jesus is present in the sacrament, shouldn't that be an occasion for joy? And yet, so many people will say to me, non-Catholics as well as children who used to be Catholics, I don't see that, believing in the Catholic faith has made my parents necessarily better people or happy people. And I'm saying the message of joy can be a transforming thing. It can help people. We have a vocation shortage, we do. And I'm telling you, I think that if more of us who are priests would be out there saying, I love my vocation, it's a wonderful thing. I'm a priest 28 years. I've said to you before, but I'll say to you again. I am so grateful every single day to be a priest. It's the greatest blessing in the world, but we need to tell people about it. I say we have to re-examine, our attitudes when we even come to communion. I think back to Sister Ann Jeremy. Sister Ann Jeremy taught me in the 1st and 2nd grade, Spark Hill Dominican. I have no idea if she's alive or dead. If she's alive, God bless her. If she's with God, then I hope she's in heaven. But she was one of those great sisters who taught us about the seriousness of the sacrament. So from age of 7 on, I was one of those guys who was terrified of walking up more about how I walked than what I was receiving. Anyway, remember in the old days, the communion wafers weren't wheat like they are now. They were very white, and they had a tendency almost like they had almost glue to stick to your palate. And I remember one time, that I'd received, and of course you received in your tongue back then only, and sure enough, Jesus went to my palate. And he wasn't coming down. And I'm a 2nd grader, and I'm getting really panicky about what if he stays there all day. Since you couldn't eat before Mass, my presumption was I can't eat after Mass either. So I'm terrified. What do I do? So I look around. Nobody seems to be around. We're all doing our prayer of thanksgiving after communion, and I don't think anybody's watching, so I figure, now back then, of course, you didn't touch with your fingers the Eucharist, but I decided nobody was watching. I'm going to pry Jesus loose. So with a hand like this, I get hold of Jesus by my palate and I pop him. At which point I don't need to pop him because I've been popped. Sister Ann Jeremy comes up behind me. She sees that I'm touching the Eucharist, whacks me in the back of the head. To her credit, Jesus came loose right away. Now, when you've been whacked for Jesus, it doesn't make you think of the occasion of reception of the Eucharist as a great joy, but I got to tell you, it is. And our faith is an occasion of great joy. And I'm saying, when you leave here today, can you think about saying, I need to smile more and to show the gladness in my heart at God's divine mercy to the people in my life? Some of you know that one of my old friends, he's now, I believe, with God in heaven, but was the old film director Frank Capra. I had been in college and I was doing fundraising for handicapped children. I needed a speaker at our annual event to raise money, and I wrote to Capra, who was then in his early 70s. He lived to be 94, and I said, I've seen It's a Wonderful Life. It's a film that's the gospel story. Would you come and speak? And he came and he spoke. But one of the things I remember, two things I remember he spoke about when he spoke about It's a Wonderful Life. He said, it's a real important thing to recognize that faith can only be taught in a happy heart, or to a happy heart. He said, so you notice in my movies, I always put a little comedy in there, he said. Because if I can get people to laugh, their defenses go down, and then I can slip in the serious message. He said, so that is why I use humor to try to communicate. Well, I think he was saying what Mother Teresa taught us too about joy. Joy releases the defenses and helps us to understand. By the way, Capra himself is one more conversion story. Here's what he did, and some of you can relate to this if you come from immigrant families. Born in Sicily, comes to America, sees that most successful people in America are Protestant people. So he says, I got to leave the Catholic Church. I'm an immigrant and a Catholic. I'll never be a success. So he leaves the Catholic Church, denies his Italian heritage in many ways, denies his Catholicism, marries Lucille, a nice Lutheran girl, has 3 kids, all's right with the world, until one day she wakes him up on a Sunday morning and says, you need to get up, we're going to church today. And he says, we don't have a church. And he says, we're going to St. Michael's Catholic Church. And he said, we're not Catholic. And he said, Frank, there's been something as your wife that I've noticed. There is a piece of your heart and your soul that's been missing. You are a Catholic and you need to go home. She said, so for the past year, I've been taking instructions privately. Today, the 3 children will be baptized. Today, I will be received into the Catholic Church. And today, Frank, you're going home where you belong. Isn't that great? I believe both Lucille and Frank are happy in heaven and realize the greatness of our faith. What I'm saying is, let's bring what we do here today outside of here, and can we do it with joy? Now, let's get into some of the serious stuff. Here's what let me start with a couple of examples of appearances can be deceiving. That's one of the themes I'm going to try to drive home today. Appearances can be deceiving. A song that's always been a favorite of mine, came out around 1984, was a popular song by Bruce Springsteen. It was from a hit album, and the song was called Born in the USA. Everybody knows how it goes. And like lots of people, I thought it had the greatest sound, the greatest beat, the greatest rhythm. I never, like most people, got terribly into the lyrics. And it was only recently, so many years later, that it was on the radio that I said, you know what I should do? Go online, because I never can quite get what Springsteen is singing, to hear what the words actually are. And I'd always taken it as a great celebration of what it is to be an American and how great it is to be born in the USA, until I finally read the words. The words are nothing but a complete diatribe against everything that is American, about what we did in Vietnam, about how violent a society are, how we can be hateful, terrible people, how awful we are, the way we treat our own people, that we're really miserable people. Born in the USA is not a salute to Americans. It's quite the opposite. I didn't know that. It looked good, it sounded good, but it had a message I would not have embraced had I bothered to listen to what it was truly saying. Second example, Chris Brown. Now, you know who he is. He's a rap singer. He's a popular singer, one of the most successful people in the music industry today, only 19 years old. My nephew is now in college. He tells me that the kids all used to listen all the time on their iPods to Chris Brown's music. Until recently, this guy who is dating this beautiful, beautiful woman, also popular in media, decides that he doesn't like what she's saying to him when she challenges him about his unfaithfulness, so he beats her to a pulp. If you saw the newspapers this week, you saw her face. You saw that this man who seems to have it all together, very successful, the perfect little couple, in fact has rage in him. What seems to be is not. and he's now been indicted for the abuse. And my nephew says it's fascinating to see how many kids on campus have made a decision, no more Chris Brown music because this guy is bad to women, which is a good thing. Now, I mention that to you because, again, appearances, Chris Brown has it all together, popular, good guy, maybe not. Third example, and this is one I think we can all relate to recently because it's embarrassing for us as Catholics. We like to believe bishops are all good guys. And we have this breakaway church in the Catholic Church, the Lefebvreites, okay? And they have a bishop, Bishop Williamson. And we are trained, you know. He looks holy. He says all the right things. He has a traditional bent. He says the Latin Mass. He seems to have it all together. Very pious-looking guy. And then the guy opens his mouth. And he says the Holocaust probably didn't happen. And he goes on to say 9/11 didn't happen because the Muslims attacked America. It was an inside job done by the American government, that those people who died on 9/11 were killed by our own government, not by the Arabs, not by the Muslims. My point is, he may wear the hat, but he's one of the biggest fools out there. Appearances can be deceiving, which is why I've said, and I say it again, anytime you invest in people, you're probably going to be disappointed. The only person worth investing in is the man himself, who will never let you down. Appearances, Bruce Springsteen. Appearances, Chris Brown. Appearances, Bishop Williamson, can mislead us. They are not what they seem. Now I want to turn to something political. And, bear with me, because a couple of people last year said, oh my God, he's so political. You bet I am. And I'm going to explain why. We are living in the age of what I like to call Obama, Reid, and Pelosi. And let me talk to you about appearances and how they can be deceiving. Harry Reid, senator from the far west, member of the Mormon faith, the Church of Latter-day Saints. Let me tell you, God bless you, what the Church of Latter-day Saints says. It says the taking of the life of a preborn child can never be justified, because that child is a gift from God himself, and any true member of the Church of Latter-day Saints cannot support it. When you ask Harry, what are you? He says, I vote pro-life. The truth is, he has created a Congress where every single bill that supports taking away the rights of that preborn child will pass, because leader of the Senate that he is, he in fact has an agenda that embraces the pro-abortion agenda. He says one thing, he embraces his Mormon faith in public, but the reality is, in practice, not one child will ever owe their life to Harry Reid, because Harry is not what he appears to be. Let's go to Nancy Pelosi, closer to home. Nancy represents what is far too frequently happening out there. Roman Catholics in public life who turn their back on their church's teachings, but who still want the Catholic vote and will say, as our vice president has said, I was an altar boy. Clearly, Joe, you weren't listening at Mass. Because if you were, you would know that there is no justification for saying, for me as a Catholic, abortion is the taking of life, therefore I personally oppose it. But, because that's just because I'm a Catholic, I will not stand in the way of anyone else, of the 1.5 million every year in our country, who chooses to abort through the full 9 months of pregnancy their child. Nancy Pelosi, practicing Catholic, receives communion every week, and yet says in her voting record, I believe in the absolute right to abortion through the full 9 months of pregnancy, has every single time stopped or voted to stop the ban on partial birth abortion. That most horrific of destruction for the innocent preborn child, she votes against trying to restrict it. A 9-month right, and supports the use of your tax dollars and mine to pay for other people's abortion. It's not enough that it's legal, she wants us to pay for it too for other people. My point is that Nancy, again, what does she do when you see her in pictures? She surrounds herself with her grandchildren. She always makes sure she mentions to you she's Catholic. She just recently went to see the Pope, and she wanted to tell everyone what a wonderful visit it was. She didn't mention that Pope Benedict said, get your act together, Nancy. Again, it's great to have a woman as Speaker of the House. It's wonderful that she has the name Catholic, but unless you're living it, it does us no good at all. Finally, President Obama. And let me say this, because I just think it's real important to say at the outset. Having lived, as most of you did, through the 1960s, and some of you earlier than that, We are an America that has to grapple with issues of racism, and it is a good thing that we have come to a point where we are tolerant and good enough to say anyone can lead our country, and we will not use the color of someone's skin as a reason not to be for someone. I am happy and delighted by an America that can choose an African American. I think it's a good thing. I'm not saying I think this man is a good thing. I am saying it is good that we have come to the point racism is a sin, and because it's a sin, we must oppose it. And if his election means that America is coming to terms with this racism, that's a good thing. But having said that, I'm going to suggest once again that appearances can be deceiving. He is articulate as all get out. He is smart. He's a nice guy. At least he plays a nice guy in the movies. He's someone who seems to be just someone you'd like to have a cup of coffee with or share a beer with. But he as well embraces completely, militantly, the pro-abortion agenda. And to give you a sense of what is particularly troubling to me as the first African-American president, consider this. The African-American population in America makes up somewhere between 11 and 12% of our population is African-American. But of those 1.5 million abortions every year, did you know that 36% of the abortions in our country are performed on African-American babies? What I'm saying is that the first African-American president, by supporting an unrestricted abortion, doesn't realize that abortions in the African-American community don't make up 12% of the abortions. They make up over 35% of the abortions, which is to say that abortion in our country is a form of genocide for his own people. And he doesn't seem to get that. Appearances can be deceiving. Now, having said that about Reid and about Pelosi and about Obama, I still know there are a few people sitting here saying, well, you know, that may be true. But I'm wondering, how can a priest go near things political? And I want to tell you what I think about why it's so important that all of us, including priests and bishops, have the courage to speak these words. First of all, I like to think back to 1937, and I ask myself, since I wasn't alive then, the question that probably every priest or bishop has wondered about. If I lived in Germany in 1937, and I knew that my neighbors who were Jewish, my neighbors who were gypsies, my neighbors who were gay were being carted off to camps, that everything they had was being destroyed, if I knew that there was an institutional bigotry against them which involved their arrest and deportation to sites unseen, but certainly it wasn't looking good for them, would I have the courage to stand up in my pulpit and address a very political issue, which is to say that National Socialism, Nazism, is wrong, that what it does to my Jewish brothers and sisters and others in society is wrong? Or would I have kept silent? Would I have said it's best that I not become political, that I not interfere in things governmental? What would I have done? Some of you may know the beautiful quote by a wonderful pastor, Pastor Martin Niemöller, because it says it all. And this is what I've wondered about often too. He is a Protestant theologian, says this. In Germany, they came first for the communists. And I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews. And I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists. And I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics. And I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. And then they came for me. And by that time, there was no one left to speak up at all. I look back to 1937 Germany and I wonder, did we speak up or did we say it's politically incorrect to get involved in this issue? Or, let's say I'm living in 1855 America, and I'm living in a border state, and I'm a Catholic, and I'm a minority. And I know that my state is trying to decide whether or not they will allow the ownership of black people to be considered as property. Do I have the ability to say, I will stand up and be counted and say slavery can never be acceptable, it is always wrong, it must always be opposed? Or am I afraid that by doing that I will alienate the people in the community and they will reject me? I wonder, as a priest in 1855 America, would I keep silent on the great moral issue of that day, which was the ownership of people as property? I wonder. And I look at these examples, and I think to myself, well, silence never aids the oppressed. Silence always aids the oppressor. So we move now to 2000. Let's move to 2000 and a time I think we can all remember. Thousands of kids in this country were abused. They were abused by priests. And you know and I know that priests and bishops knew it, and they kept silent. Is there anyone here who in that particular scandal thinks that children were well served by the silence of those in charge who should have known better? The reality is, silence, whether it's about slavery or Nazism or abuse, always aids the oppressor, never the oppressed. And so you ask, what's a priest doing up here talking about politics? Politics involves law and the rights of mankind. When we are silent, we allow the bad guys to win and the good children to be slaughtered. I think it is the obligation of every Catholic Christian, bishop, priest, cardinal, and layperson to say, I will not be silent. How much time I got, Doc? I'm just getting warmed up here. Come on. All right, I'm gonna bring this to a quick end, but I wanted to. I know. Let's come on. I wanted to end with a story, and I'll use actually two quick stories. Gene Taylor is a guy you probably will never know. He's a congressman from southern Mississippi. He's a Catholic. And when he was elected to Congress in a traditionally Republican district, he went to Washington. He was sworn in by then Speaker of the House, Tom Foley. On that day, he said, what's the first vote? And they said it's to extend the use of tax dollars to pay for people's abortions in the District of Columbia. And he was told it was a party line vote. All Democrats were expected to vote for this particular bill. And he got sworn in by Speaker Foley, and then he went to vote, and his first vote was against his party. So there was a press conference afterwards, and people said, the Speaker of the House, who was from your party, insisted that everyone vote on this issue for taxpayer-funded abortion. And you have gone against the Speaker of the House, the head of your party. What are you thinking? This doesn't bode well for your future in the Congress. And he said, and I happened to be there at the time, he said, sometime, maybe not soon, but Speaker Foley's going to die, and I'm going to die. And when we stand before the judgment seat of God, I suspect that no matter what he says on my behalf, the Speaker of the House can't save my soul. And what's this got to do with mercy? Very simply put, there are, I would say, conservatively speaking, at least 30 million or more women out there who've been through the abortion experience. I sit with them, I cry with them, I hear their confessions, I counsel them. And I know how their hearts are torn apart. The mercy of God requires that we speak with great courage for the defense of life, but it also requires that we remember the people who had those abortions are real people, our sisters, our friends, our daughters, our mothers. And our job is always, in speaking the truth, to speak it with mercy, to speak it with forgiveness for the sins that people commit, because we know ourselves to be sinners too. Our sin might not be abortion, but we've all sinned. And that requires of us that we be merciful in our judgments of others and always extend the hand of mercy and love as Jesus would expect us to. I'm going to close with a prayer meditation that is written by a woman to her aborted child. And it talks about the mercy of God and what you and I ought to be for each person who struggles with the decision to abort or not to abort. She named her child. She sensed that she had a daughter, and she named the daughter who had been aborted Annie. Dear Annie, I don't know how to begin. If you were here, I know that I'd hold you so tight, and I wouldn't ever let you go. And I'd cry, and you'd cry, and we wouldn't need words, would we?